Okay, so I have also more excepts from the book of genetic origin of the nations. We have talked about this, but we're gonna be a little bit more focused into it right now. We're gonna go into see some important studies that have been done through the offspring of mankind, including the so-called Jews. The so-called Jews. So what the genetics said, one of the greatest advances of human genetics is the measurement of DNA on both men and women. Men are measured by means of Y chromosome that is transmitted to the offspring from father to son in a continuous line that mutates over time. This is called Y DNA. Only men carry this DNA through their Y chromosome. They being XY, women have XX chromosomes. Within the genetics of the influence both men and women, it's inherited from mother and father. Okay, the X that belongs to the parent, and said that this X is established to care directly from the parent, and by the maternal grandparents the Y. We're gonna see right in the image how it does. All right. So the female line is measured by examining your mitochondrial DNA, called the mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA, held by both women and men. Mitochondria are grouped into halogroups that are related to lines of women, in which they occur, and this line is transmitted by the mother for her offspring in the X chromosome, which are owned by both men and women. Y-DNA and DNA-MT are measured in two different ways. Y-DNA is measured with so-called polymorphs. These polymorphs are given numerical value, and according to the value when evaluated, the subgroups are called clades and subclades to the total grouping that is called halogroup. These values record the change and mutations and Y-DNA lines. Y-DNA lines. The Y-DNA system that has been assigned to the males of the human species is grouped into a series of halogroups from letter A to R, the lines that we're going to see. The customary and extensive measurements using the Arizona system is normally 37 places as markers. Basis tests are performed by the first 12, then up to 25, and then continue up to 37 of these polymorphic locations, or location to determine halogroup relationship and association between the lines. There are 100 or more markers analyzed the changes, aka polymorphs. An example of what a typical Y-DNA structure can be followed as what we see in the image. These are the values that when evaluated are assigned to this left column, and on the table. These values help determine whether a person belongs to a typical Celtic halogroup, or one is among the Semites or Amerindians or Polynesians, Chinese or Japanese racial type. To properly determine the class, what is known as the S&P test is performed, but the values of marker test 12, 25, and 37 point to the right direction. So this pretty much the simplified tree of Y chromosome halogroups. It's the different blood types of stored means. There is a sufficient quantity in which has been determined to get to where each nation comes from, or the place of every single person could come from, region. mtDNA, mitochondrial DNA. Mitochondrial was first sequenced in 1981, in which it became known as the Cambridge Reference Sequence, CRS, Cambridge Reference Sequence. The CRS has been used as a basis as comparing with the individual mtDNA. In other words, anywhere in individual, the mtDNA that has a difference compared to the CRS, that is described as a mutation. Harmonizing the Bible and genetics. In order for the Bible to respond to the challenge posed by the all-important genetic discovery, then it must be locate this structure to the records of the Bible and explain the distribution of nations in terms that can be properly considered and respond to the challenge that gene trees represent both Y-DNA and species mtDNA. For example, while Aaronic priests are identified as a J2, the Levitical structure of Ashkenazi Jews is 52% R1A1, which is unidentified Japhetist lineage presented in Russia and the Central Eastern steppes among the Aryans in India. It is Slavic. Furthermore, 25% of all Eastern Europeans Jews are E3B, which indicates a camp's origin. I want you guys to notice that part of this is important, in other ways within genetics, that they have done this so far to identify the purity of, if there is purity in the blood of them, to what so-called Levites that exist in the Israeli state. And they had realized that there is no purity, but a lot of mixing, and there is not enough purity to determine who is Levite or who is this or who is this not. Okay, we keep going. The base of UK mutation appears to have occurred in the Middle East and the area of northern Israel and Lebanon, and included a significant portion of women and former the Druze lineage. They were ancestors of the 52%. They were the ancestors of 32% of Ashkenazi Jews. The other town with a large part of K are the Kurds, in which U forms the majority. HGU makes up significant parts of all European DNA. It is more important that among the Sami, there's an African groups of HB, H, U, V, and K are the main groups in all European with HGS, I, and J. That means there's a whole mixture in there. Groups H forms more than 50% of all Anglo-Celts, Scandinavians, French, and it's even larger in Iberia, part of Spain. The considerable difference between the Ashkenazi and Europeans in that the division K is greater between them and the Europe. For this reason, the movement of K may have subsequently occurred within Europe, or may have been less than U mutation there. It is possible that these divisions occurred from the breaking of the alliance of patrons and the displacement of the horde of the interior of Europe and Order Oden. Beginning from the 2nd century, the two groups probably formed the same Scythian horde composed by Celts, Israelites, and Jews from the Hittite alliance. The horde of Parthians, the Scythians, that entered Europe, and the other tribes formed from Khazar horde that became the Khazar Empire, which converted to Judaism around 740 CE. Until the 11th century, then they were defeated by the Rus, and later entered in Europe by the Huns. Pushed them, maybe. This explains why non-Semitic DNA Levites in Ashkenazi Levites, which is the bulk of their Y DNA, is R1A1, which is Slavic and not Celtic. We must also remember that the Jewish identity from the time of the Talmud does not exactly follow the system of the Bible, given that it has been acquired by maternal descent by Jewish women or by rabbinical authorized conversion, by which non-Levite Levites emerge. Kohen, the last name they attribute themselves, Kohen, DNA is considered to come from Khazar conversion, and perhaps as many as 50 men enlisted as Levites with the Slavic Khazar horde. There appears to be a single male appearance that expanded considerably after entering Europe. The Kohanim and Levites each comprise 4% of the Jewish population. only 4% of them, they can really say, I am Kohen. According to the Encyclopedia Judaica in 1972, Gentiles can become Israelites, but not Levites of the Kohanim. Obviously, this norm has not been respected in the Khazar conversion. Obviously. It's important to know and so to remember inside of Talmudism over the Judity, the offspring does not come from father as comes in Torah. Or in Torah, you will see the descendants of men, and you will corroborate the son of him, birthed him. The son of him birthed man. The son of this man birthed the other man. In the Talmud, it's established that the offspring come from the mother, not by men. So there is the first inconsistency. Later in the Talmud, it is written that those who convert from Gentiles are automatically Jews, and over to be able to adopt or to be part of the certain tribe. In this case, many of those Gentiles who converted later professed to be Kohen or Levite priests, and that obviously that would not bring a falsehood, right? That would bring a totally falsehood. Jews attempt to limit the origins of the Ashkenazi to a small area in the northwestern Europe from northeastern France and northern Germany, especially northern Germany. They claim that its origin is as old as the 6th century. This area was at the time of the central site of the Parthian horde and separated and moved to Britain in Scandinavia, France, and Spain and Italy. Of course, we understand that. We know by history. Some Jewish elements of the horde may have moved there or followed the horde later. The problem is that the previous definitions consider that the Yiddish development in the 10th century, the Ashkenazi language, was considered to be apparently a language based on Hebrew letters, but with words borrowed from the German lexicon. However, in fact, a Slavic language is related to Sorbian and Belarusian languages. This hypothesis now confirms that the majority of Slavic Y DNA of the Ashkenazi Levites. Now the Sorbian language is considered to have been given Hebrew letters and German lexicography. Y DNA R1A1 is also related to the Sorbian language and Y DNA Belarus. How consequence is that? It's not a consequence. These tribes can be identified as the children of Ashkenaz and part of the horde of the Kazars, which is therefore demonstrably Slavic. How cool is this? Therefore, we can deduce that haplogroup J was not the original Semitic group. Therefore, the Semites belong to more than one standard haplogroup descended from Abraham. The original Semitic haplogroup was F, and it was divided into at least A and J and probably G, I, and J from the Middle East and Patria, Scythia, and Europe. An analysis of this hypothesis can be made referring to the results of Behar at the Ashkenazi Levites were examined on 60 male lines in 9 countries. These countries were Austria, Hungary, 10, Belarus, 4, France, 6, Germany, 10, Lithuania, 8, Netherlands, 5, Poland, 7, Romania, 4, Russia, 6. Of the 60 DNA lines examined, only 8 were true Semites. The other results were as follows: 12 known Secam lines from Denmark 1, France E3B 11, and 4H1 from Belarus, and Lithuania 2, Romania 2, Russia 1 from Germany. 40 lines are presumed as Japhetites. Japhet, KLNOP per 1, and 1 from Germany, and N1 per 1, that's Lithuania, and Q per 1, which is in Russia, R1 per 1, which is in Germany. This is a very rare line that was previously found to Armenians. R1A1 is a 31 per 31, 4 AH, and 3 per 3 in Belarus, 3 in Lithuania, 6 in Polonia, 1 in Romania, 1 in Russia, 4 in France, 7 in Germany, 22 in Netherlands. And the other one, Rabani B and R1B per 5, on 1 in Russia, 1 in France, 1 in... a total mixture. I'm not sure what's a total mixture. We're still reading all of this. The Semitic lineage are seen below and help demonstrate the point that divergence of Semitic lineage discussed above. By Sem, that is F, I, J, and J2. The implication of these wide DNA samples go quite far. These are only 4 lineages that are same J2 lineages at the CMH. Only 6 share halogroup J. Therefore, only 10% of the Ashkenazi Levites examined are recognized as direct Jewish Israeli Y DNA. According to current interpretation, the figures are staggering. 2/3 of the DNA and Ashkenazi flock code are not Semitic. Almost 10% are Celts, and staggering 52% are Slavic DNA. The studies conclude also, because of the homogeneity of the model R1A1 haplotype, that the ancestor existed perhaps only 663 years ago. The root could have come from just one person. This may have coincided with the establishment of the Jewish communities and Mainz and Worms from the Encyclopedic Judaica 1972. The star-shaped patterns and the DNA R1A1 indicate the rapid growth of the population of Ashkenazi Jews in the past 1,000 years. Not a coincidence. The diversity of Ashkenazi Levites suggests a genetic intrusion after the Ashkenazi separated from other Jewish populations. The origin of the Ashkenazi Levites R1A1 is therefore probably with the Khazarian speakers of the Sorbian language who converted to Judaism and entered to Levi, in who then rapidly expanded in Europe. These are non-Aaronic and indeed non-Israelite Kohanim. You see them from the groups, from the countries. How many are they? Notice that there are much lower percentage of converted kazars among the base Israelites than among the Ashkenazi Levites. The conclusion that we could draw from this statistic is that the families of the nobility, and perhaps the Kagan and Beg of Khazars, were converted to obtain Levitical status, and that the converts who remained faithful to Judaism went west from Europe with the Huns, who were followed by the Bulgarians. The paganized Slavs remained separated behind to be swept away by the Rus, and then the Mongols in 1215, and came later to the Sorbs and the Belarusians of the Huns and Polish. What is certain that those who adhere to rabbinical Judaism are not completely Jewish Israelites, and 60% of all Jews are either Camites or Japhetites converted to Judaism. That is, unless some aspects of K can be shown to be Semitic rather than Japhetic, which could be completely overhaul the Y DNA sequence. So we have a video that is going to confirm on this documentation from historians, from different sources, that we have concluded to the moment, which is that we also realize that history and genetics are also poetry, that they are, according to this individual, that these authors and researchers do not lie, that, by the way, the majority of Jews are over Israelisti or Ashkenazim, even placed to important positions, and so in the world of economy, media, and multicultural companies are placed today there. So they don't come from lineage of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob. So therefore, the Levites that claim to be Levites, they want to participate in Jerusalem temple, in the building of the third temple, and the famous reconstruction, then it would be nothing else than usurpers. There will be nothing more else than usurpers. People who isn't from the Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob offspring, as it strives, but they are more from Cam's and Japheth. Not just talking about the contest of the oral traditions and Torah, doing an analysis to the Jewish faith, that you can realize that it is a very, very Talmudic based, more the halacha, the oral tradition, and then the observation of Torah. Plus Kabbalah, living all of this way, living this as their way of life. They have that as their way of life instead of Torah. Even the Shulchan Aruch, also product of the Eastern Europe Jews, and about the Jews, the compendium of the Mishnah extracted laws. But obviously, there is where the believer run the risk of falling into to placing Yeshua in a kind of a Jewish movement, and have seen previous chapters that this is not the case. He didn't live any kind of Judaity. He was Israelite from the tribe of Judah. Yes, that nullifies praise that the faith is a biblical faith, that the faith is from the faith that lived from Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, the faith of Moses, David. Another type of Judaism necessarily, all right?
The massive 8th century conversion of entire kingdom, Khazaria, to Judaism. Wow. So why did they become Jewish? What happened to them? It's a really an amazing story. If you look at this first slide here, you see the green area is roughly the range of Khazarian influence. It's a massive region. In the area of what would be called, let's say, Ukraine, a good chunk of Russia, the Caucasus mountain regions, Georgia, Azerbaijan, places like that. And this region was Jewish for about 500 years. Wow, how did that happen? And so that's what we're going to talk about today. Let's look at it in a little more detail. So first of all, perhaps you have come across the story of the Khazars through this book, the Sefer HaKuzari, written by the great Spanish Jewish poet Yehuda Halevi. This is a 12th century work that is quite a bit later than the actual conversion of the Khazars, which is dated to the year 740, but it essentially tells the story of why this King Bulan of Khazaria converted to Judaism. Now, what's really important to understand about this, though, is that Rabbi Yehuda Halevi was not trying to write a history book. This is a work of Jewish philosophy. If you want, it's a work of comparative religion. It's not intended to be an accurate historical account of the conversion. The story goes like this, as presented in the Kuzari, but basically, it's, in brief, it really is what happened. This King Bulan, a pagan living in his capital of Itil, which is on the northern part of the Caspian Sea, he wonders about, what is religious verity, and he decides he's going to hear from all of the great monotheistic faiths. He feels like it's time for himself and his people to move on from paganism, and clearly monotheism is a burgeoning trend, and therefore he says, okay, let's find out about, what's going on with the monotheistic faiths. He calls for a debate between the three great Western faiths, that is Christianity, Judaism, and Islam, and he has all of the figures discuss the historical elements of their faith, and ultimately, after he hears all of them, he decides that Judaism makes the most sense, and he converts himself, and his entire nation follows him into Judaism. That's the basic story as presented in the Kuzari. Now, why Rabbi Yehuda Halevi wrote it, and he could only write it really within the very special environment of Spain, which had large Muslim and Christian populations, was to give Jews an opportunity to defend their faith against the arguments of the other two great monotheistic faiths. And by couching it within a historical fact, the conversion of the Khazars to Judaism, he was able to present this rather challenging theological debate within a historical format, but really his main goal was to present the truth of Judaism vis-a-vis its competitors for people's allegiance. So we can't look at the Kuzari as a historical document. It is a work of phenomenal Jewish philosophy, but nevertheless, the basic story is really the core of what happened. But let's go into a little more detail into that. So here's a map of the entire region that you can see that the city of Itil right there on the north of the Caspian Meer, which is the Caspian Sea. This happens to be a German document. And they really extend quite far. If you can see up towards the top left, you see Kiev, which according to the great Ukrainianist Omelian Pritsak of Harvard, the late Ukrainianist, he believes that Kiev was actually a Jewish outpost of the Khazars, which is fascinating to think that, you know, the central city of the entire Eastern European civilizations of Ukraine, Belarus, and Russia, what's called the mother of all Russian cities, so to speak, was actually a Jewish trading post to begin with. But nevertheless, you see it goes all the way from Ukraine, right across much of the Don region in Russia, and well into Central Asia. So what exactly happened? The Khazars' conversion, which we'll turn to right now. So what were the prime reasons for it? Probably the most basic reason for the Khazar conversion was the fact that they had geopolitical questions to deal with. We saw this map earlier when we looked at the spread of Islam. I've added this kind of yellow region that says Khazar influence. But when you look at this, you see, okay, Islam is rushing up into the Khazarian region from the south. Islam is an up-and-coming faith. It's expanding with tremendous rapidity. And the Khazars, who are pagans, are saying, oh my gosh, we could easily be swallowed up in the in the Muslim expansiveness. At the same time, not really shown here in this map, but I kind of like the colors of it, Christianity is spreading from the west. Christianity has already taken over much of the northern bank of the Mediterranean Sea, and it is steadily making its way into what would later be Ukraine, Belarus, Poland, Russia, and so on. And so the argument is that King Bulan realized, wait a second, if we succumb to Muslim pressures, then we will lose our religious identity, and along with that, we will lose a considerable amount of our political independence. Furthermore, we'll be a borderland region, and we will end up being on the front lines with the spread of Christianity. Similarly, if we were to elect to become Christians, then ultimately we would fall within their geopolitical orbit, and then we would become a borderland to the Muslims, and we would potentially have a political and military dispute with them as well. But Bulan realized that, in fact, both the Christians and the Muslims regarded Jews as a sort of privileged, protected people. The Muslims through the Pact of Umar, the Christians through the Doctrine of Witness, and therefore he said, wait a second, what if we take a moderate approach and we become Jews? Then Muslims will have to, respect our political integrity, at least to some degree, Christians as well, and we can retain our identity within the context of the spread of these other two great monotheistic faiths. That seems to be what he decided, and in fact the Khazars did maintain their independence as a Jewish nation for about 500 years as a result. Still, we have lots of other questions like, wow, they became Jewish? I mean, what happened? Why did they become Jewish besides the geopolitical? How Jewish were they? How come we don't hear anything more about them? I mean, these are all really big questions. So let's look at those right now. So there's evidence from medieval travelers that, in fact, the level of their Jewish commitment was fairly thin. Travelers like Benjamin of Tudela, Pataki of Regensburg, talk about the Khazars, and they don't seem to have a lot to say about them. It doesn't seem to really excite their attention that there is this huge Khazar kingdom. Not to mention the Geonic responsa that has survived from Babylon, which is not so far from Khazaria. We don't have too much reference to the Khazars. They don't seem to be really on the radar of the rest of the Jewish world, so much so that we really only hear about them in the 10th century with Chasdai ibn Shaprut. There's some significant question that maybe they didn't practice very basic rituals like circumcision, and that's like one of the the most fundamental Jewish rituals. As Jews become assimilated, it's one of the very last rituals to go. Perhaps they were Karaites. Perhaps they practiced a form of Jewish expression that denied the validity of the oral Torah. That's also a possibility. It's kind of lost in the dark. And it's very difficult for us to determine this from the archaeological record. If you see, for example, this coin from early Khazaria, it looks like a Jewish symbol, but the fact is the Star of David wasn't a Jewish symbol for many, many hundreds of years later. So it's hard to really understand what kind of Judaism they practiced, but the bottom line is they probably were not practicing full rabbinic Judaism as other peoples were. Many scholars feel that perhaps the reality of the Khazar environment was such that only the top layer of society, the royalty, for example, converted to Judaism, and the rest of the population just maintained a nominal kind of attachment to Judaism. All these things are possible as we understand the degree of conversion of the Khazars. Now,
so this is Rabbi Richman. He retired from the direction of director of the Temple Institute in 220, and they both, along Rabbi Glick, are dedicated to propaganda, to media and political influence, even religious influence, to the building of the third temple in the Temple Mountain. That by both Rabbi Richman and Rabbi Glick. Rabbi Richman maybe not too much, but Rabbi Yehuda Glick is a very, very influential by today into the Temple Mount. He's doing a lot of social media network and to get people calling the senses, I could say, using the emotional, even sometimes using the humanism thought to say they're abusing of the Jewish people. But he gets into the abuse of going to the Temple Mount without the permission that the authorities given him there. We'll see what they do in there, and what these so-called Levites trying to do in the Temple Mount, and teachings and that they try to do in there.
Hardline religious group Matei Irgunei Hamikdash, or headquarters of the temple organizations, has a mission to rebuild a Jewish house of worship on Jerusalem's Temple Mount. Currently home to Al-Aqsa Mosque, Islam's third holiest site, the location has been long contested between the two religions. The Jewish group, however, maintains that the location is key for fulfilling biblical prophecies.
It is a new start of the redemption, and we hope that next year or even before we will be on the Temple Mount. The law will come from here. All the 70 nations, they will have a seat in the court, and the law will be the law of the Bible.
On a rainy day before Passover, the organization gathers on a rooftop in the Old City to carry out a controversial practice: ritual sacrifice. Under the watch of high security, the sheep is brought to a secluded area. Religious followers continue to make final preparations.
We're on another milestone in the process of the return of the Jewish people to their homeland.
Young men playing the role of priests dress in biblical-looking clothes. It's now time to begin. Everyone gathers to pray as the priests reenact ancient traditions from the Bible.
The event that takes place here is not an event in itself. It's a practice. It's a training. And people are coming here to learn, to understand.
Out of the eye of the public, the sheep is slaughtered. Its blood is brought out for ritual use.
And maybe this year, in 4 days later, the representative of the groups of the Israelites will come with their lamb to the yards of the temple. We built a kosher altar and start all the ritual of Pesach lambs.
To complete the sacrifice, the lamb is skinned and displayed for the group. The body is cooked to be eaten later that night.
So here's are the arpas, or they are preparing. They teach the children, they teach the kohanim, the so-called kohanim, into all these elements that they have prepared and ready for the third temple. And this as you see the Magen David inscripted into the arpa, something we're gonna see further there. All of these elements are prepared for the temple, for the musicians, and etc., etc. So these, of course, are gonna have years of preparation and tryouts for the famous little temple. They also have ready the red cow, or the famous red heifer, or the cow, or geula cow. I don't know how you call it in Spanish. But it has to be all red anyway. According to the Talmud, it has to come miraculously for this sacrifice. But of course, for the purification of the land where the third temple is gonna be built. So crazy thing. It says in Texas, but it's a place in Israel what is already in there, and they have one that was born in 2018, and so it's a different one than this one right here. This is an update from a rabbi from Israel, and of course they want money for this.
For 33 years, the Temple Institute has been building and teaching and sharing the truth and beauty of the Holy Temple, striving to prepare Israel and the world for the rebuilding of the Holy Temple in Jerusalem, soon in our days.
The Temple Institute is a nonprofit organization. Our ability to continue our work and outreach depends upon you. In the words of the prophet Isaiah, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all nations."
Please support the work of the Temple Institute.
So I got this presentation news from Israeli state, and of course working on to what is the third temple. There was a late news by the end of the Gregorian calendar in December 2019. For news from Israeli state, I'm gonna start bringing you guys this. The last month I came across something that I found throughout possibly understandably recently. It's so strange that even Jewish rabbis had to cry at the presentation and said, "How could this overlooked? How could this be overlooked?" This is the story. Since the conquest of the city of Jerusalem in 1967, Jewish archaeologists Benjamin Mazur and Ernest Marian, and more recently Bob Carnock, have concluded extensive research which have conceivably shown that the temple was in the city of David. That they're saying that the temple was built, or what is called today the city of David. And so the city of David is located into a small neighborhood into close to Jerusalem called Silwan. I don't know if you remember, guys, in the beginning of the video, but people burning olive trees. It is an intention what he's doing there in Silwan. No matter how shocking this may sound, there was never been a temple in the so-called Temple Mount, but rather a Roman fortress called Fort Antony. This fort was built to house the 10,000 men and 600,000 soldiers to 4,000 support personnel. Since all the Roman forts had been standardized 35 acres to 12 acres. So, remember in Silwan, we're going to see what's happening in Silwan and why this news come now from the Israeli state saying that the city of David was built. The first temple was built over the so-called city, the city of David.
So I'm Peter Larson. Who am I with? Who am I talking to?
I'm Sarah Karai.
Sarah. And Sarah, just tell us briefly, where are we today? What are we looking at here?
We are in Silwan, especially in Al Bustan neighborhood. Good morning.
Good morning. Sabah al-khair.
We can see another neighborhood in Silwan,
Right.
Hawa and Lawton. Each one of them has its own story with Israel.
So you said El Bustan meant garden. This was a garden at one point. Is that
Yes.
correct? Okay. And now you said your family is from Silwan. You're from Silwan.
Yes.
what's the problem in Silwan? Why is there friction between Palestinians and the Israeli government in Silwan?
There are two main organizations for settlers and for the government
Right.
to try to take the land of Silwan for the government. One of them is Ataret Tuhanim, the other is El-Ad.
Right.
El-Ad means El-Ir David, which means to the city of David.
Right.
And they work mainly in Silwan to try to make the houses, to take the land, give demolishing orders to make a garden, and
So, and you were telling me, in addition to the demolition orders, you're also saying that they are scaring the children. And tell me a little bit about that.
they're trying to force everyone to get out of Silwan by making them afraid, using the force of arresting people, demolishing houses, and even when they are children younger than 18, they give them house arrest orders, which means they can't get out of their house or even go to school. And sometimes they give them this order outside of Silwan.
What kinds of things would children be arrested for? What were the reasons that they would give for arresting people?
Yeah, sometimes they don't have reason. They just arrest them because he's walking on the street and just making things up for him to make it legal for arresting him, such as throwing stones or just thinking about doing something, planning for doing something, even if he was under the legal age.
And so far, have the Israelis been successful in making very many people leave here?
No. Even the houses were demolished.
Right.
People of Silwan are trying to rebuild it.
Uh-huh.
And the demolishing orders that are in Al-Bustan neighborhood, we are trying to delay. There are so few people of Silwan who went out of Silwan, but we can't consider them as they went because they were afraid. There's other reasons.
Now you showed me a building far up on the other side there, which I think I had seen in a movie before, which was a house that the settlers had taken over up there, and they had done it on some land where they apparently had purchased it from a Palestinian who had sold it to them. Does that happen from time to time?
It happens, but not with this building. This building was built to be a settlement, but they took some other houses in the same neighborhood.
Right.
They just kicked out the Palestinians from it and to take it.
But you said they kicked them out, but someone purchased the land, either directly or indirectly, to move in, correct?
Yes,
Yeah.
and this might be happened a long time ago, but they just take it.
Take it over now.
Yes.
Okay, well, thank you very much for introducing us to your world. I appreciate it.
You're very welcome.
Three Wars Olive Groves. In her 2009 publication entitled Three Flags, legal scholar and ethnographer Aruz Braverman describes how Palestinians identity olive groves as emblem of symbol of their long time, steadfast agricultural connection to the land. In May 2010, a group of Israeli settlers torched an 11-dunam olive orchard in Rabamah Valley in Silwan, again, south of the old city of Jerusalem, which included the destruction of three olive trees that were over 300 years old. And this is people who called themselves so-called themselves Jews. In a 2011 New York Times article, these attacks were called price tag attacks. It will something beautiful if you tag that into YouTube, see what's going on. Late news is very good to get what's going on, how they abuse of the power, how they abuse of the thoughts and philosophy because of their religious heresy. Similar destruction of olive trees occur in Jabal Jails in the area of near Hebron and Huara. The United Nations report that by 2013, 11,000 olive trees owned by Palestinians in the occupied West Bank has been damaged or destroyed. 11,000 olive trees. Is something against the olive tree? There is something against the olive tree. Washington Post, October 2014. More than 8,000 Palestinian farmers derive a substantial portion of the annual income from the olives. Harvesting the fruit, pressing the oil, selling and sharing the products of a ritual part of life. So by finishing, I want to show you guys a little bit of the conclusion of some news that I got and found that I want to share with you. I'm going to start with this one. In 2012, a study entitled "The Missing Link of the Jewish-European Ancestry: Constructing the Reinhardt in the Khazarian Hypothesis," concluded by Aaron Enlil. It's quite more German, which can be downloaded from this page, found that the geographical origins of the European Jews varied from different reference populations, but all results converge to southern Khazaria, the Caucasus. Khazaria along modern Turkey, Armenia, Georgia, and Azerbaijan. Throughout the historical record, several nations testified of several nations. It's not just nobody. It's a good research. Testified to the presence of powerful proselyte Jewish nation sitting in the southern northern Caucasus region, whose empire had collapsed early in the 11th century. The scholars choose to ignore this as a logical reason for the rapid increase of the Jewish populations of adjacent of nearby countries. Upon the collapse of their empire in the 11th century, those fleeing conversion found their way into Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, from there into Central and Western Europe, Tagish, I would say Tagish. The language of the Khazar Jews is still spoken in Poland, Hungary, Lithuania, by the Karaites and the Kimskachi of Crimea. Linguistic research has shown that the Yiddish, an amalgam of Hebrew, medieval German, Slavonic, and other elements emerged from Germany's eastern border adjacent to Slavonic belt of Eastern Europe.
The Israeli-Palestinian conflict has been the focal point of geopolitical instability in the Middle East since the establishment of Israel in 1948. Although the vast majority of the international community, the UN, and the United States publicly support a two-state solution to try and end this conflict, after decades of negotiation, a final settlement has never been reached, and tensions between the Jewish state and the Arab world continue to fester. Throughout this process, America has remained firmly behind Israel as its greatest supporter. In fact, Israel receives more U.S. foreign aid than any other country in the world. Now, much of this support has been attributed to a strong, wealthy, and very pro-Israeli lobby in America, which is true, but you'd think that the majority of the strength behind this lobby would be the Jewish community in the U.S., which is only partially correct, because as it turns out, in terms of sheer numbers, the evangelical Christians from America's Bible Belt make up the majority of this lobby's power base.
This may be the most important prophetic spot in the entire Bible, because the final act of the book of Revelation is going to begin right here at this place. The Bible teaches that Russia, Iran, Ethiopia, Libya, Turkey, and other nations will come down under a UN flag, and they will invade Israel at this particular point. Can you imagine? Thousands of tanks out here in this valley, rumbling, fighting, firing. Can you imagine jet airplanes screaming overhead? The battle is going to be fierce.
The horrific multinational fighting this preacher is describing is the Battle of Armageddon, which is supposed to happen right here, just as soon as Israel is a fully Jewish state. Which is why a bunch of Christians in Texas have become the most fervent Zionists on God's green earth.
While most Americans probably think that the pro-Israeli lobby is largely a Jewish thing, actually most of its support comes from right here in the Bible Belt, where evangelical Christians overwhelmingly believe that Israel has a right to exist because God said so.
Go to the phone right now and call that number and say, yes, I'm going to stand with Israel. I'm going to bless the people of the Bible. I'm going to bless God's chosen people.
Will those of you in this audience who support the state of Israel stand to your feet and give a shout of support?
While a lot of Israel's financial support does come from Jewish wallets, there are close to 70 million evangelicals in America versus less than 14 million Jews worldwide. And given that roughly 80% of these Christians support Israel, that makes American Christians the largest pro-Israeli voting bloc in the world, about 4 times the size of the Jewish community on Earth.
There's a lot of money behind the Christian Zionist movement. This church behind me, Cornerstone, is one of the biggest supporters of Israel, not just among Christians, but in the world. The pastor here, John Hagee, has raised an estimated $70 million over the course of his ministry.
Pastor Hagee also founded Christians United for Israel, or CUFI, which is the largest pro-Israel lobbying organization in America, even bigger than AIPAC, the organization most people assume dominates the American Israel lobby because it's the biggest Jewish one. What's dicey about CUFI is that a good deal of their money for Israel is spent on buildings and organizations in the Israeli settlements. These are massive Jewish communities built well within Palestinian territory, in violation of international law. The settlements are run by some of the most fanatical Zionists who believe the Bible entitles them to their land, and that ceding any of it back to the Palestinians would be a violation of God's law.
God gave them that land. They own that land.
While there's nothing wrong with Christians supporting Israel, the way these Christians have chosen to do so puts them firmly on one side of the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, one that's directly opposed to the US government's official policy, and are using their massive political power and money to oppose the peace plan John Kerry is currently trying to push through. That's the two-state solution that would give the Palestinians the West Bank and Gaza Strip, and the Israelis would get the rest, hopefully ending all the violence. The evangelicals not only lobby Washington and send money to Israel to fight the two-state solution, they also make up over 40% of American tourists in Israel every year with popular Holy Land pilgrimage tours. Many of these tours actually have stops in the Israeli settlements, which are used by the settlers to solicit donations for their cause.
We're in Karnei Shamram, Israeli settlement. We're about to meet Sandra, who deals with Pastor Hagee in the United States. She is not a Christian, she's an Orthodox Jew. And right now she's hosting a bunch of Christian Australians who are touring the settlement and hopefully coughing up the bills.
To make the settlements more relatable to their Christian friends, Sandra and her organization used the Palestinian territories' biblical names of Judea and Samaria.
It is for us as people who believe in the Bible is to stand on the moral and spiritual right of the Jewish people to Judea and Samaria. Amen? Amen. Good.
After Sandra's presentation, we reboarded the bus to see the settlement for ourselves.
Come on, guys. I want you to try to punch him in the stomach. Let's give it a try. Unfortunately, our Arab neighbors also have these kinds of guns. You need to be protected with something like this.
How important is Christian support for specifically for the settlements?
Christian support for the Jewish presence in Judea and Samaria is critical because it's a very large group of people all over the world, and we need to hear their voices, and thank God they are raising their voices on this issue louder and louder every day.
Another Christian Holy Land tour leader is evangelical pastor Irvin Baxter, whose End Time Ministries takes its flock to Israel twice a year. The focus of their tours is actually the real reason evangelicals overwhelmingly want the Jews to control all of Israel, which is the actual end times, as in Armageddon. Because, according to their interpretation of the Bible, Jewish control of the Holy Land will lead directly to the second coming of Christ.
The word Armageddon is actually 2 words, Har Megiddo, or Hill of Megiddo. You are standing on the Hill of Megiddo right now. The final act of the book of Revelation is going to begin right here at this place. And when Israel's about to be defeated, the Bible tells us that Jesus Christ himself will intervene. It says it this way: the Lord himself will descend from heaven with a shout, with the voice of the archangel, with the trump of God. He is going to defeat the Antichrist. He's going to defeat the false prophet. Both of them will be cast alive into the lake of fire. At that time, Satan is going to be bound for the next 1,000 years, and we are going to crown Jesus Christ as King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Real quickly, I will take time for a few questions.
What will be happening in Maryland at that time?
Well, I can't tell you for sure if Maryland will still be there or not.
In addition to Armageddon, Pastor Baxter's End Times tour hits all the other local attractions associated with the apocalypse, including the most contested piece of real estate on the planet, Jerusalem, which houses some of the most sacred sites for Jews, Muslims, and Christians alike. It's also where Jesus lands at the grand finale of the end times, which doesn't pan out so great for the Jews.
2/3 of Israel will die. It's Zechariah 13, I think, maybe verse 7, 8, 9, right in that area.
Yeah.
That 2/3 will die. 1/3 will be brought through the fire, and that 1/3 will then turn to Messiah en masse when he comes back. And the scripture says that they will run out to him, and when they bow to worship him, Zechariah 13:6 says they're going to notice he's got wounds in his feet and in his hand. And they're going to say, "You're Jesus? Oh, Messiah, we've been so stubborn, we've been so proud, we've been so blind. Could you ever forgive us?" And 2,000 years of blindness is going to come peeling off the Jewish mind. And those of us that have been caught up in the rapture and come with Jesus here too.
Oh, because the Christians have been raptured out.
All who are born again
Yeah.
will have been raptured. When Jesus comes, we'll be caught up to meet him in the air.
Yeah.
And then we will come with him to the Mount of Olives. And so we're going to be watching this whole panoramic thing unfold as the Jewish people turn to their Messiah. We're going to be converting people by the hundreds of thousands during this time. It's going to be the best of times and the worst of times.
While the 2/3 of Jews who die are definitely getting the worst of times into the stick, it's a little less clear how the rest of the world fares in the pastor's end of days scenario.
Can America get on the right side of Armageddon by supporting Israel?
Americans can let their legislators know, support Israel. Right now, under the President Obama administration, there seems to be a drift somewhat away from Israel, at least a determination to force Israel to do what America thinks it should do.
The only way for Israel to endure and thrive as a Jewish and democratic state is through the realization of an independent and viable Palestine.
The Jewish people should say, look, this is our promised land. The Bible says we should not give it up, so we're not giving it up. You have to respect our religion.
Aside from potentially derailing an otherwise pretty solid peace plan, Christian support for the Israeli settlements further makes life a pain in the ass for the Palestinians living nearby, which is exactly what's happening at Beit Jala, a Palestinian village on the outskirts of Bethlehem, where Jesus was born. Javier Abu Aid is also Christian, as well as an official in the Palestinian Liberation Organization. We met him at a weekly outdoor mass put on by the Catholic Church as a form of protest against Israeli encroachment.
2 years ago, an Israeli court decided to build the wall here, where we are. So basically all this valley that you see here, it's going to be on the Israeli side of the wall.
Hello, how are you?
Hey, how are you? For example, he's one of the 58 landowners that are going to lose their land here. It's and are 58 Palestinian Christian families that are going to lose their land here. And you're not talking about, immigrants that came here. You're talking about indigenous population of this land. We are standing now over a territory that no one in the world, not even the US, recognizes as part of Israel.
I know a lot of evangelicals, it's really big in America right now to support Israel because they say, well, the Bible says Israel belongs to the Jews. And a lot of them also believe that once the Jews take over all of Israel, then they get to have Armageddon.
I read the Bible, and I never saw that the Bible says that God is a real estate agent. Those Christian Zionist organizations, they are not giving money actually to the state of Israel. They are giving money to the most ideological settlers. And of course, I don't think that's a very Christian act.
If I were a Palestinian Christian, I wouldn't involve myself in this conflict. I'd stay out of it and say, look, I know what's coming. I'm going to serve Jesus Christ. When he gets here, he'll straighten all this out.
While Baxter's advice for Christians on the ground is basically just to bunker down and get ready for the inevitable, he and his fellow Christian Zionists in America are working full tilt to make the end of days a reality, and are using the voting strength of their followers to try and get Washington on their side. And in a political conflict that's already been hijacked by religious zealots on both the Palestinian and Israeli side, adding millions of doomsday-ready American evangelicals to the table is like pouring gas on the fire, in the most flammable region in the world.
And of course, I want a cherry pie for the end. I want to show these images. One is the first statue that was emerged in some part of the Ukraine, and is something very popular into nationalism in Ukraine. It says, "I'm coming at you," and they use the Sviatoslav first, a very historical represent person into the Ukraine history. Sviatoslav first, Igorich, or in the Old Slavic, Slavenku, or even in Nordic is called Nevingad Ivarson, and from 942 to 26 March 972, also spelled Sviatoslav, was a Grand Prince of Kiev, famous in his persistent campaigns to east and south, which precipitated the collapse of two great powers of Eastern Europe, the Khazarians and the First Bulgarian Empire, the Bulgars. He also conquered numerous of Slavic tribes, defeated the islands, and attacked also the Bulgars, and the times would ally with the Pechengs and the Magyars. Sviatoslav is a villain in the novel The Lost Kingdom. No wonder why. Or The Passing of the Kazars by Samuel Gordon. Yeah, of course, he has to be a bad image of purple. But you know what? Other traditions in Ukraine love him. He's an iconic person. He's a very representative for nationalism in Ukraine. They love him. Fiction-based account, talking of the book by Samuel Gordon, a fiction-based account to the destruction of Khazaria by the Rus. The Slavic warrior figures is more positive context in the history. Chenen History and Birachia by Vladimir Klaslov. His story is included of his book Historici Povestry. I'm not talking too much Russian. In 2005, I'm going to talk about these images in here. In 2005, reports circulated that in village of Belgorod, region that had erected a monument to Sviatoslav victory over the Kazars by the Russian sculptor Vyacheslav Krylov. The report described that the 13-meter statue is depicting a Rush Kalbarian trampling a supine Khazar bearing a Star David and color red. That's the first one, and it has the Star of David. Very, very, very picturesque. This created an outcry within the Jewish communities in Russia. The controversy was further exacerbated by Kieslov's connection with Ramiyad and other anti-Semitic organizations. They got a cry. As well as by involvement in the Letter of 500, a controversial appeal by the Prosecutor General of Review of Jewish Organizations in Russia for extremism. The press center of Belgrade Regional Administration responded by stating that a planned monument to Sviatoslav had not yet been constructed, but would show respect to white representatives of all nationalisms and religions. Then the statue was unveiled. The shield bore a 12-pointed star, which is the next one on your right. What Sviatoslav said. Order to his soldiers to renounce gold, because they did not go for war for the sake of profit, but against darkness, a parasitic Khazar social system, which in forming centuries roved the land of our ancestors. The victory over the Khazaria is the triumph of the Slavic weapons and invisible spirit of the Jewish parasitic system created by the Khazarian state.